Metallica, Some Kind of Monster, documentary feature about perhaps the most popular metal band of all time, made at probably the lowest moment in their career. And best of all, that thing about the film taking place during the lowest moment happened kind of accidentally. In 2002, after a few months of not touring and not recording, the members of Metallica got back together, minus Jason Newsted, the bass player, who has left a little before that. The remaining trio, James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Kirk Hammett, were supposed to start working again on a new album, one which ended up being called Saint Anger. They hired a documentary crew to follow them around and shoot the making of the album in hopes that this would be this big return at the moment where they fix all their problems and go back to making great music again. But it quickly turned out that the problems are much more prevalent than they would expect. The ego clashes between Hetfield and Ulrich, Hetfield's alcohol addiction and subsequent rehab, Ulrich's legal fight against Napster, the lack of a full-time bass player, a therapist specially hired to help the band. All of this created this volatile mix which slowed down and at times completely halted work on the album. At the end of the day, the material shot for the film ended up spanning over 1,000 hours of footage shot across 2 years, which was then edited down into this film, which itself is still quite long, running at almost 2.5 hours. So, obviously, Some Kind of Monster will mostly be appreciated by Metallica fans, or at least fans of thrash metal in general. But I actually think the movie has quite a lot of merit beyond that and can be interesting for any fan of music. The reason for that is mainly its unique placement on the timeline of the band's life. What I mean is usually when you have these music biopics or documentaries, they follow a very similar structure. We learn about the band's humble beginnings and initial success, then there's the inevitable period of problems and egos and clashes, and finally they come together again at the end. This film is basically just that middle part, blown up to be a whole movie. We're watching the band at the worst point in its career, where nothing seems to click, to come together and work, and the best part is, it's not artificial drama that seems made up for the film. That the filmmakers just happened to be there at that point in time when years of issues finally boil over. As a result, I think a lot of the scenes have this raw quality to them. They feel genuine and real. There's one moment especially where Lars meets up with Dave Mustaine, who was kicked from Metallica years before that and then went on to create Megadeth. The conversation that these two have is surprisingly sobering and heartbreaking. On the other end of that spectrum, there's a handful of funny moments as well, especially where Lars is arguing with James over their different creative visions for the songs and the album as a whole, and Kirk is just sitting there like a child watching their parents divorcing. And from time to time, he's just calmly asking to guys, let's just sit down, let's play some music, only to be ignored. I thought it was really quite funny to have these two loud, confident guys who cannot agree on anything, and then the third one in the middle who just wants to shred some solos on his guitar. One more aspect which I liked was that the early 2000s were an interesting time in terms of hairstyles and fashion, clothes in general that the people wore, which is also reflected by the band members' looks and uniquely dates the film. You can take one look and guess when it's taking place. Finally, I think Some Kind of Monster is also surprisingly accessible to wider audiences, despite the fact that it focuses on internal dynamics of this one specific band that plays this specific genre of music. It is really good at giving context for what's going on, quite often by having flashbacks to recordings of the band at various earlier points in their careers. And that certainly helps people who are not as into Metallica enjoy the film for what it is. Which I did as well. I think Some Kind of Monster is a cool documentary about that is interesting, both as this little Metallica encyclopedia and as a look into what problems plague musicians and popular artists and how exactly they can manifest. Good stuff.